did Stanek get the right side? I mean, I hope he did, otherwise...
Either that or he's taking his fucking wheel off. He's just slamming it into the paint.
Someone with, like, practical skill help me
Hello. You might notice that this video seems a bit smoother than normal if I manage to actually upload it in the frame rate that I'm filming it in. I'm filming at something like 50 FPS, which for those who don't know means that there are more pictures flying by per second. The camera's taking more frames per second so that it ends up looking smoother and hopefully more like real life. The first time I actually saw a high frame rate video like this, or relatively high frame rate, it was kind of jarring because it was like videos aren't supposed to look like that. It almost doesn't look very cinematic just because it's so realistic and you can see all of the way the person's face twitches in a lot of detail and stuff like that. The reason I'm filming this particular video at a high frame rate is because that's how I've filmed the time capsule video that I'm doing. This video I'm doing now is just a kind of update on that. I think I mentioned it about a year ago. I was going to do this exactly a year after I mentioned the time capsule video last year, but I've ended up doing it now because I'm doing a video on the R sound, which is taking a lot longer than I expected. So I just thought I'd put this here to tide us over, and then we don't have to wait so long between videos and stuff. But yeah, the idea of the time capsule is basically to capture normal conversations and stuff during a fairly interesting period of history, which is the COVID pandemic. So if you haven't watched that video, then the idea of it is basically that films and stuff often depict the past as, well, obviously they depict it in a dramatized way. Conversation isn't always the most naturalistic for perfectly good, like, stylistic reasons. And so we end up thinking of the past as a kind of foreign country that none of us, or many of us, can't really imagine actually being in. We can't imagine it being a real thing. Whereas of course it was just as real as the modern day. Everything was just as sharp as the modern day is. Everyone's lives were just as rich and made just as much sense as people's lives do today. So I thought, if there's any risk of people having the same sense of disconnection from the COVID pandemic and the early 2020s, then hopefully a kind of time capsule of normal conversation and normal street scenes and stuff will bridge that gap a little bit. And as it's turned out, a couple of historically interesting things have happened over the course of the year apart from COVID. So within the UK, one of those things has been Prince Philip dying, which happened less than a month into me starting to record things. So I got the day Prince Philip died, I got the day of his funeral and what me and my friends were doing those days. And that was an interesting one because in the run-up to that, I'd wondered a lot about what would happen if a member of the royal family died, because in my lifetime the only member of the royal family to have died was the Queen Mother, and that was in something like 2001 or 2002, and I can't remember that. Like, I had memories from probably 2002, but the Queen Mother dying definitely wasn't important enough to me at that point for me to bother remembering it. I wasn't quite alive when Princess Diana died. Hopefully that wasn't a spoiler for anyone watching The Crown. But yeah, my dad recalls when he found out about Princess Diana's death, he said he was woken up to the sound of his radio alarm clock playing some song, and then at the end of the song, the DJ, or whatever you want to call him, said, and that was in tribute to Princess Diana, who died yesterday night. And he was like, what do you mean she's dead? But yeah, I wasn't born at that point. So yeah, this was the first royal family member dying that I witnessed, and it's clearly something quite a few people are interested in, because there are hundreds of videos around the internet about what will happen if the Queen dies. What's the plan for when the Queen dies? I'm sure there were some videos about what will happen when Prince Philip dies as well. How accurate they turn out to be, I'm not sure. But yeah, that was a very interesting thing to live through. I remember it was a sunny day. I woke up at about noon. I think it was announced relatively late in the day. It was probably announced on the BBC News pretty much when I was waking up, if I remember rightly. But yeah, it's just strange that a big member of the royal family dying was something that I was very interested in a kind of morbid way, and now it's been a full year since Prince Philip died. It's very strange. On the day of the funeral, I remember thinking kind of, you know, this is actually sad in a weird way, because there's this person that's just been there my whole life and now he's just not going to be at events anymore. And it's not as if I ever met him, not as if I had any connection to him, you know, personal connection to him at all. It's just, I don't know, leaving the politics of whether or not the royal family is a good thing out of it, it just felt like kind of sad that a constant had just suddenly been cut off like that. It was an emotion I didn't really expect to feel at the death of somebody that I had no personal connection to. But yeah. In terms of my own memories, one strange thing I've thought about is that when I listen to people who have lived through World War II, for example, talking about their memories of World War II, it always seems to me that there's so much detail they leave out. So they might talk about going and doing something with their friends, they might talk about their friend making a joke about such and such, but it's, you know, obviously I can't have the same memory as they have, they can't convey that whole memory into my head. So there's so much detail about how things looked and how things sounded and what the weather was like that they leave out because it's not relevant to the story. And I realised that when I try and recount things that have happened this year, I do the same thing, you know. For example, one thing that is on record in the time capsule is that me and my friend Nikki were out filming something. Actually, we were filming the stupid video that I put out. I think it's called, like, contains vulgar language or something like that. But we were filming that, and while we were filming and walking along the river, we saw something kind of silver bobbing up and down in the water, and he reckoned it was a fish, and I said, I think it's just a piece of plastic. So he walked down the riverbank to this thing, and it was indeed a fish. It was a dead, we worked out later that it was a dead pike. And then he went up the riverbank a little bit, and I only remember this in so much detail because I've watched the video as well. He walked up the riverbank a little bit, got a stick, came down, tried to get it out. The stick was too short. He went and got another stick, and then he lifted it out, and it was this enormous pike. And he sort of slammed it down, and it smelt really bad. And then yeah, we sort of carried the pike somewhere else in the forest. I remember there was lots of wild garlic on the floor, which we tasted. And then we kind of looked at the pike a bit and poked it around, and it was very well kind of intact. And then something was going on, like I had a meeting or something on Zoom. So he cycled back, I cycled back home. After my meeting, we both cycled back to where the pike was, and he brought some, like, scalpely things. And then we sort of cut into the pike, and it was full of this gorgeous sort of orange roe. It had been really pregnant before it died. We sort of cut away the roe and sort of looked. That's the kind of thing that's I find quite interesting, like sort of you know, organs and living things and stuff like that. It was a dead thing in this case, but that sort of thing I find interesting. But thinking about telling that story, if I heard that story, I'd find it hard to actually imagine the reality. Like, there's so much detail in that story that, or rather there's so much detail in that memory that I can't convey in the story, because I can't convey where the trees were in relation to each other, and like how much, you know, what the RGB values of the garlic plants were, and, you know, stuff like that. It's just sort of left me thinking, without ways of objectively recording things like video cameras, how are we supposed to get a good idea of how these things played out? Another thing I did recently with Tom Birchall was the 1960s conversation thing, and I think we got a lot of good information there because because there were lots and lots of people who very kindly responded, and so we had a large volume of information to work from, so we were able to kind of triangulate things that most people said sounded wrong or sounded right. And it was that triangulating lots of people's opinions that I think got it to the point that the second time we released it, people had less criticisms. But I, as just one person, I think if you showed me the equivalent video of two young people trying to recreate a naturalistic conversation from like 2005, which is a year I definitely have plenty of memories from, I think there are some things that I would definitely be able to say that doesn't sound right. But there are other things that I just wouldn't know. Like the way people talked in the early to mid 2000s was appreciably different to the way people talk today, at least where I live. But I mean, mostly in terms of slang and stuff, I think people pronounce things pretty much the same way. I think certain sound changes have definitely become more popular as younger people have grown up. But yeah, there are certain things that I don't think I could accurately report based on my memory from 2005. But yeah, as I say, if there were 3,000 people that remembered 2005 all contributing and they were all from roughly the same area, I think you would get a good picture of it. But me and Scott, who was in the How We View the Past video, we were talking about if you were to do a video like that, would it be better to use resources from the time? Because at least, you know, even if there are very few recordings of naturalistic conversations from, say, the 1950s, the ones that you do have will be more accurate than somebody's recollection from that time, because their memory will have been supplanted with things from more recently than that time. Their memory of the slang from that time will probably have been supplanted by A, slang from 10 years later, B, slang that they maybe seen in films depicting the time that wasn't around back then. But you know, so would it be more effective to look at resources rather than going back to people's memories? And I do think ultimately people's memories are good if you triangulate enough people's memories against each other. But yeah, interesting thoughts about how to access this information and how to preserve it before it disappears, kind of thing. It's always an urgent question, because there's always a generation of people who are, you know, who are going to die soonish. You know, it's a morbid thing to say, but I'll be part of that generation at some point, hopefully, unless I die in like my 20s or 30s or whatever. There's always a decade's worth of memories that nobody will have in 10 or 20 years' time, but that people do have now. So it's an urgent question all the time, and it's something that I think throughout my life I'll be working on. What's the best way of getting the most information possible so that these people's memories don't just die with them, and people's ideas about the world 70, 80, 90 years ago don't end up being, you know, horrifically inaccurate. But yeah, this is something I'd be interested in making a few more structured videos about, because this has been a lot more rambly than the one I did last year. But there's always more stuff you can find from the past that sheds naturalistic like when a light sheds light on naturalistic detail and stuff. So I think I'll probably make a few more videos like this. Although I realise people come here for linguistic stuff, so I'll stick to that mainly as well. But yeah, thank you for listening to this ramble, and I'll talk to you very soon.